The airplane wheels screeched against the runway as Amelia Carter's flight touched down in Portland. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool window, watching the blur of airport lights streak by. Her left sleeve hung empty, pinned neatly at the shoulder, a quiet reminder of Afghanistan and everything it had taken from her. In her pocket, her phone vibrated once more. She had sent a simple message before boarding: "Landing soon. Can someone pick me up?" The reply from her family had arrived just minutes before the plane descended. A short, cold dismissal that cut deeper than any battlefield wound. "We're busy. Take a taxi." Amelia sat still, reading the words again and again as if repetition might soften the sting. But there was no mistaking the meaning. They hadn't come. They hadn't wanted to. Passengers around her gathered their belongings, greeting loved ones on the phone or smiling at the thought of reunions waiting at the gate. Amelia tightened her grip on her duffel bag, forcing herself to stand. Her boots felt heavy against the terminal floor, each step echoing the silence of absence. When she emerged into the arrivals hall, families embraced, children ran into open arms and banners of "Welcome Home" waved in the air. She searched the crowd instinctively, her heart betraying her hope, but no familiar faces appeared. No one called her name. Swallowing hard, she walked past the joyful reunions and out into the cold night. The air smelled of jet fuel and rain. She hailed a taxi, sliding into the back seat alone. As the driver pulled away, Amelia leaned against the window, her reflection staring back at her. A soldier who had survived war, only to return to a different kind of battlefield, one of loneliness and rejection. The city lights flickered by, distant and indifferent, while Amelia sat in silence, carrying with her not just the weight of her missing arm, but the heavier burden of a family that had chosen absence over love. The taxi slowed to a stop in front of Amelia's small house on the outskirts of Portland. The porch light flickered weakly, as if it too had grown tired of waiting for someone to return. She paid the driver, thanked him softly, and stepped out into the damp night. The air smelled faintly of moss and rain-soaked asphalt. Her key rattled in the lock before the door swung open with a reluctant creak. A wave of stale air greeted her, heavy with dust and neglect. The silence inside pressed down on her shoulders, thicker than the weight of her duffel bag. She dropped her bag near the entryway and flicked on the light. The bulb buzzed before casting a pale yellow glow across the room. Stacks of unopened mail littered the small table by the door. Bills, advertisements, envelopes stamped with "Final Notice." It was as if time had continued without her, piling up evidence of absence. Her boots echoed against the wooden floor as she moved slowly through the house. The furniture sat exactly as she had left it, but everything felt foreign, as though the home no longer belonged to her. Dust clung to the edges of the windows, and the refrigerator hummed with a hollow emptiness when she opened it. No food, no welcome, just bare shelves. Amelia lowered herself onto the worn couch, the springs groaning beneath her weight. She let out a long, shaky breath, staring at the shadows stretching across the walls. Her body ached from travel, her shoulder throbbed from the phantom pain of what was no longer there, and yet the deeper ache came from the silence itself. She wrapped her one arm around a cushion, holding it close like a shield against the emptiness. "It's fine," she whispered into the stillness, her voice barely audible. "I'm fine." But the words dissolved into the air, unconvincing even to her own ears. The hours dragged on in the empty house. Amelia tried to distract herself. She stacked the unopened letters into neat piles, wiped a thin layer of dust from the kitchen counter, and turned on the old heater to cut through the biting chill that seeped into the walls. The hum of the heater was oddly comforting at first, a steady background noise against the hollow silence. She curled up on the couch, exhaustion pulling her deeper and deeper into its grasp. The room felt warm, almost too warm, but her body was too heavy to move. Her eyelids fluttered. Her head grew light, her thoughts sluggish. She told herself it was just fatigue from the long flight, from the years of carrying both visible and invisible scars. But as she tried to stand, her knees buckled. The world tilted sideways, the room spinning into darkness before she could catch her breath. The next thing she knew, she was staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize. White tiles. Bright fluorescent lights. A rhythmic beeping at her side. Amelia blinked, her throat dry, her head pounding. A plastic mask covered her mouth and nose, feeding her oxygen. Tubes and wires connected her to monitors that tracked her heartbeat and breathing. Confusion swept through her until a nurse appeared at her bedside. "You're safe now," the nurse said gently. "Carbon monoxide poisoning. You were lucky someone found you when they did." Amelia tried to speak, but her voice cracked into silence. Her hand groped for her phone on the tray beside her. The screen lit up and her breath caught when she saw it. 28 missed calls. All from her family. For a moment her chest tightened with something dangerously close to hope. After years of silence, of being ignored and dismissed, had they finally cared? Had her absence struck them like her absence from their lives had always struck her? But even in her dazed state, doubt coiled in her gut. Why now? Why only after the story of her return, a one-armed veteran, had reached the local news? The monitor beside her beeped steadily, filling the sterile hospital room with its cold reassurance. Amelia set the phone down on her chest, staring at the ceiling. The missed calls glowed like accusations in the dark, a cruel reminder that even in her most fragile moment, she could not be certain whether her family's sudden urgency came from love, or from fear of how they might look to the world. Lying in the hospital bed, Amelia let her eyes drift shut, but sleep refused to come. Instead, fragments of memory surfaced, sharp, uninvited flashbacks that tugged her back to a childhood she had long tried to bury. She was 8 years old again, standing in the backyard with tears streaming down her face. The sharp sting in her arm told her it was broken. She had fallen from the old oak tree while trying to keep up with her brother, Troy. She remembered crying out, clutching her arm, waiting for someone to notice. But her parents had rushed past her, focused instead on getting Troy to his little league game on time. She had sat there for hours, the throbbing pain her only company, until a neighbor finally drove her to the hospital. Another memory surfaced, a school auditorium filled with applause. Amelia, at 12, stood on stage holding a certificate for her science project, 3rd place in the state competition. She searched the crowd for her parents, scanning row after row of faces. They were gone. They had left halfway through, rushing to make it to Troy's basketball tournament. She had walked home alone, clutching the certificate like a consolation prize for invisibility. The memories blurred into a pattern, each one carrying the same weight, being forgotten. Her brother's successes had always been celebrated with cheers, parties, and photos framed on the mantel. Her own achievements, good grades, small victories, quiet resilience, were met with distracted nods or brushed aside entirely. By the time she was a teenager, Amelia had learned not to expect applause. She stopped trying to show her parents her art projects, her essays, her medals. She simply tucked them away in drawers, convincing herself that maybe indifference hurt less if she no longer sought attention at all. And yet the ache remained. Even as she grew older, even as she built walls of steel around her heart, a part of her still longed for a single word of recognition, a sign that she mattered as much as Troy. Now, staring at the sterile hospital ceiling, Amelia realized how deeply those early lessons had shaped her. She had been training for years to endure loneliness, to expect neglect. Perhaps that was why the silence of her empty house hadn't surprised her, why the cold text at the airport had felt more like confirmation than betrayal. Indifference had been her family's language, and she had been fluent in it since childhood. The desert heat in Afghanistan was merciless, a weight pressing down on every soldier in Amelia's unit. Sand clung to her uniform, sweat burned her eyes, and the constant roar of distant artillery was a reminder that death was never far away. Yet, amidst the chaos of war, Amelia felt something she had never known at home: belonging. Her comrades didn't care about her last name or how her family compared her to her brother. They didn't ask if she had been overlooked as a child or if anyone was waiting for her back in Portland. What mattered was simple. Could she be counted on? Would she hold the line when the firefight began? She remembered one night vividly. The unit was pinned down during a night raid, bullets carving sparks against the stone walls around them. Fear was thick in the air, but Amelia didn't falter. She crawled forward under enemy fire, pulled a wounded soldier to safety, and returned to the fight without hesitation. Afterward, no one gave her hollow praise or compared her sacrifice to someone else's. Instead, they looked at her with quiet respect, a nod of acknowledgement that carried more weight than any applause she had ever sought as a child. Around the campfires, laughter softened the edge of war. Amelia found herself listening to stories, childhood pranks, favorite foods, dreams for after deployment. For the first time, she wasn't the forgotten shadow in the corner. She was part of the circle, her voice heard, her presence valued. When she spoke, they listened. When she faltered, they encouraged. When she fought, they fought beside her without hesitation. It was there, under the unforgiving desert sky, that Amelia discovered something her family had never given her: dignity. She wasn't just Troy's sister, or the quiet one. She was Sergeant Amelia Carter, the soldier who would carry her brothers and sisters through fire if she had to. The battlefield was brutal, but it was also honest. In war, there was no room for pretense, no masks of status or reputation. A soldier's worth was measured by courage, loyalty, and the will to stand when everything inside screamed to fall. And in that truth, Amelia finally found herself. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was indispensable. The explosion came without warning. One moment Amelia was scanning the dusty road ahead, the next a deafening blast swallowed her world in fire and shrapnel. She remembered the metallic taste of blood, the searing pain in her left arm, and then the unbearable emptiness when she realized the arm was gone. The medics worked frantically, voices blurred by the ringing in her ears, but all she could think of was how quickly life could be shattered. The hospital tent smelled of antiseptic and dust. Bandages wrapped tightly around her shoulder where her arm had once been. Every throb reminded her of what she had lost. Fellow soldiers stopped by to check on her, offering words of encouragement, some with scars of their own. They didn't pity her. They treated her as one of them, a fighter who had paid a price. In their eyes, she was still whole. But when she finally received messages from home, the hollow ache in her chest deepened. A text from her father: "Glad you're alive." A curt line from her mother: "Take care of yourself." And silence from her brother. No phone calls, no warmth, no effort to bridge the distance. Their words were like cold drops on a deep wound, touching the surface but never reaching the pain beneath. Amelia told herself not to care, yet a part of her still clung to hope. She imagined her parents waiting for her return, imagined that when she finally stepped off the plane, they would be there. Arms open, tears in their eyes, proud of the daughter who had sacrificed so much. That fragile vision carried her through the long, bitter nights when phantom pain twisted through her missing arm. But hope was a double-edged blade. It kept her going, but it also cut deeper with every reminder that she was still forgotten. She survived Afghanistan, yet the indifference of her family carved scars far sharper than shrapnel ever could. Still, she held on to one belief. Maybe, just maybe, they would change when she came home. The hospital room was dim except for the steady glow of the monitor by her bedside. Amelia sat up slowly, her shoulder aching where the bandages pressed against her skin. On the tray beside her phone, the screen still showed the haunting number: 28 missed calls. For a fleeting moment her heart had leapt. Was this it? Had her family finally realized what she meant to them? But the truth unfolded with cruel clarity. When a nurse casually mentioned that a local news channel had run her story, "One armed veteran returns home alone," everything clicked. Her parents, her brother, their sudden flood of calls wasn't about her. It was about them. About appearances. About the whispers of neighbors and colleagues who might now question why the Whitfields had abandoned their decorated veteran daughter. She remembered her father's words so many years ago: "We can't afford to look bad in front of people." That phrase echoed now, tainted and bitter. The calls were not cries of love. They were alarms of panic. Amelia felt a cold calm settle over her chest. For years she had swallowed her pain, locked it away behind silence because silence kept the family peace. But what had that peace ever given her? A lonely childhood, an indifferent homecoming, and now, when her scars were most visible, they wanted her back only to polish their own reflection. Her thumb hovered over the phone screen, the urge to call them back gnawing at her like an old habit. But then she pressed the power button and watched the screen go black. For the first time in her life, she refused to chase after their approval. A thought surfaced, quiet but unshakable. I won't protect them with my silence anymore. She leaned back against the hospital bed, closing her eyes. Her body was tired, but her spirit had never felt sharper. For the first time, she wasn't the forgotten daughter desperate to be seen. She was Amelia Carter, a soldier, a survivor. And she was ready to speak. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the hospital air when the door creaked open. Amelia's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the weight of a moment she had dreaded and longed for all at once. Her parents entered first, their eyes darting nervously around the room as if afraid of being seen, followed closely by Troy, her older brother, whose polished suit and self-assured stride looked more suited to a boardroom than a hospital ward. Amelia, her mother began, her voice trembling with rehearsed sympathy, we were worried. We called so many times. The words, thin and fragile, fell flat against the thick wall Amelia had built inside her. She looked at their faces, faces so familiar yet so foreign, and felt nothing but exhaustion. You weren't worried about me, she said quietly, her voice steady. You were worried about how it looked. About the neighbors, the community, your precious reputation. Her father's jaw tightened. That's not fair, he snapped, then softened his tone as if realizing his mistake. We've always cared, Amelia. We just didn't know how to show it. Amelia let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Didn't know how. When I broke my arm at 8 years old and sat alone in the ER because you left to watch Troy's baseball game. When I came home with a medal, and you didn't even stay long enough to hear my name announced. When I lost my arm fighting for a country you say you're proud of, and all I got was a 2-line text saying, "Glad you're alive?" Her words cracked like glass shattering, years of silence breaking open in one unstoppable tide. Her family shifted uncomfortably, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her truth. You abandoned me, Amelia said finally, her voice low but fierce. The 3 words carried the power of decades of neglect, heavy and undeniable. The room fell silent. Her mother looked down at her hands, twisting them together. Her father's eyes darted to the window, unable to meet hers. Even Troy, who had always basked in their parents' spotlight, had no words. For the first time, Amelia wasn't begging to be heard. She was demanding it. And the silence that followed wasn't hers to bear anymore. It was theirs. When Amelia was discharged from the hospital, the sky outside was gray, drizzling with a fine mist that clung to her jacket. She braced herself for the silence of returning to her empty house. But something unexpected happened. Her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, a widow in her 70s, knocked on her door that evening with a warm casserole in her hands. You shouldn't be cooking for yourself just yet, she said gently, her eyes kind and unwavering. The simple act caught Amelia off guard. It had been so long since someone had shown her thoughtfulness without condition. Soon after, another neighbor stopped by with bags of groceries. A young mother from down the street brought over fresh bread. These were people she had barely spoken to before, yet they reached out in ways her own family never had. Each small gesture chipped away at the heavy wall of isolation that had wrapped itself around her heart. Then came Michael, an old high school friend she hadn't seen in years. He showed up with a sheepish smile, holding out a set of spare keys. I've got a guest room, he offered. Stay as long as you need. You don't have to be alone in that house. Amelia hesitated at first, pride prickling against the offer. But when she stepped into the guest room, warm, lived-in, with fresh sheets and sunlight spilling through the curtains, she felt something she hadn't in years: safety. It wasn't blood ties that gave her comfort now, but the compassion of strangers and forgotten friends. These people had no obligation, no expectations, no reputations to protect. They simply cared. And in their care, Amelia found the first fragile threads of belonging, threads strong enough to begin stitching together her broken spirit. Her healing didn't start with her family's apology. It began with the kindness of people who saw her not as a burden, not as a soldier defined by scars, but as a human being worthy of love. Months passed and Amelia's strength began to return, not just to her body but to her spirit. The bitterness that once clung to her slowly gave way to clarity. She realized that the most powerful response to years of neglect was not anger nor silence, but living a life so full of meaning that her family's rejection no longer mattered. She poured her energy into creating something bigger than herself, a support fund for female veterans. Drawing from her own struggles, Amelia envisioned a place where women who had served, often overlooked, often silenced, could find the recognition, resources, and community she had once longed for. With the help of neighbors, friends, and even strangers who believed in her vision, the fund began to grow. Donations trickled in, then surged. Soon, women across the state were reaching out, finding in Amelia the voice they had needed for so long. Every time she stood before a group of veterans to share her story, she felt the weight of her past loosen. She spoke not with bitterness but with conviction. We are more than the scars we carry. We are proof that dignity and strength can rise from neglect. Her words resonated, planting seeds of courage in those who listened. Meanwhile, the Whitfields watched from the sidelines. Their carefully crafted image of success and perfection looked pale beside Amelia's quiet, authentic impact. Reporters who once quoted her father's business ventures now asked about Amelia's foundation. Invitations that used to arrive at her family's door were now addressed to Amelia Carter, veteran and advocate. Her revenge was never about destroying them. It was about refusing to let their judgment define her. And as she laughed around dinner tables with friends who felt like family, as she received letters from women whose lives had changed because of her fund, she understood something profound. She didn't need their love anymore. She had found something stronger. Her happiness, her peace, her chosen family, these became the truest, sweetest revenge.